Hello, and welcome to the SCA Workforce Hub webinar series. And this particular series is the Mentorship and Registered Apprenticeship Programs. I am Dr. Kimberly Harris, subject matter expert in DEIA, and always excited to be joined by my esteemed colleague, Mr. Corey DiBiase, subject matter expert in Veterans Affairs. So we are here having this conversation, mining down a little bit deeply, talking about this particular support mechanism that can really make the difference between a successful apprenticeship and one that is not so successful, right? We know that an apprenticeship is an investment of time, effort, and energy, and money. And we want to make sure that that investment, all of those forms of investment are honored and are leveraged and are supported and are basically utilized in a way that the ultimate outcome is the one that we want to achieve, which is a successful apprenticeship program, which are apprentices who successfully complete their program and are able to have thriving livelihoods for sure, and also contribute in the ways that we would want to their employers. So having a competitive workplace that is made so by extremely prepared and talented apprentices. And a key part of that is ensuring that we have the supports for apprentices along the way. And mentorship is definitely one of those mechanisms, tools that we know has been utilized to create some successful apprenticeship programs. And so with that in mind, we just want to delve down, as we said, this particular session 4, is dealing with the matching process. So to ensure that success, to ensure that all of the things that we want the mentorship relationship to yield for us, we need to make sure that the match is a good match, right? For those of you who have yet to view session 3, please do. For those of you who have, you will recall that my colleague Corey DiBiase talked about it's levels to this, right? It's not just enough to have the apprenticeship program. It's not just enough to make sure that you've got apprentices who are getting trained in the technical application. That's what the apprenticeship process is for itself. But it's not enough, and it's not enough to have that mentorship program that is helping foster that, or helping to make sure that that process is successful, I should say. As Corey mentioned and talked about in session 3, we need to make sure that we have done as best we can a matching process that ensures a compatibility such that folks feel comfortable coming together, talking, being vulnerable, sharing, and really cultivating deep relationship, right? So there are, things that we need to keep top of mind, and, the matching process is definitely and can definitely be some of that secret sauce. And we want to, in as much as we can, leverage that and make sure that we've done it well. And there are different things that we can do in service to that. So just kind of taking and keeping in mind all the things that we're going to delve into with this particular session, the objective of this session 4, this matching process session rather, is to talk about, this process of determining the mentee's needs, right? So as Corey also talked about, different mentees are going to come in at different places and spaces. We know that they all have the capacity and the wherewithal to be trained and ultimately do the job, the trade that they are endeavoring to learn about and master. But to get them to that goal, different apprentices are going to need different things. And the beauty and another benefit of a good mentor program is that when done correctly, when executed correctly, it can help meet those needs. And so part of that correctly executing of the mentor-mentee relationship, that program, is to ensure that we don't leave the matching process to happenstance. In as much as possible, we want to make sure that we've done what we can do to ensure that we have a good matching process. So one of the things that that requires is we need to be aware, and we need to determine what the mentee needs. Also in this session, and also in service to that, we're going to talk about aligning those needs, those mentee needs, with mentor experience, expertise, and identity. So we're going to talk about defining without limiting the goals of the relationship, right? We know that there's a lot of space for mentors and mentees to develop deep, meaningful, long relationships that may last, and we want to last, hopefully for a lifetime, because we know that these relationships, they have implications beyond the workplace, right? People get to know people, people begin to build community, and that takes on a life of its own. So we want to define without limiting the goals of the relationship. And also we want to make sure that we are clear on expectations, because not all of the things that will be born from that mentor-mentee relationship are things that we can plan for, but there should be a baseline of things that we say, these are the things that should be done. These are the things that we expect. These are the outcomes that we are looking for. And then we're going to also, as always, in this particular webinar series, going to spend some time talking about the role of evaluation in helping us to achieve those goals and objectives. So we're going to talk about the evaluation process. We're going to talk about the importance of understanding the effectiveness of the matching process and the role that evaluation can play in that. So first, we're going to start off about, like, as we said before, determining the mentee needs. And so when we're thinking about, all of the things, some of the ways, how can we think about what things can we do to ensure that we know and have a good handle on what is needed to do the job successfully. So one of the things that we can definitely make sure that we've done is conducted a job analysis, right? So grounding on what are the core components, what are the essential things that are part and parcel of doing the job successfully. So conducting job analysis definitely is a function and activity that can help us to achieve that. So when we are conducting the job analysis, some things that we need to be thinking about, be mindful of, is the job culture. We need to be able to assess that. So we can do that in so many different ways. There are things that we can pull from historical data. We can engage in ethnographic observation. We can do several different things that can help us to get a sense of the job culture. And then from there, we also can engage in assessing workplace climate. We definitely need to be clear on the purpose of the job and identify the key tasks performed and anything that may be a precursor to those key tasks that we need to be explicit about. It's definitely going to be a good idea to interview subject matter experts. These could be managers, supervisors. These could be folks who have definitely done this work, or whose job functions are interdependent on this work being done. So we want to talk to folks who know and understand what the job entails and why it is important. We also want to take some time to probably observe incumbent workers, and if possible, take part in some degree of job participation, or at least bring those folks into the conversation. And as Corey had mentioned in the previous webinar, include the folks most proximal to the job, to the whole job function in and of itself. When I say job function, I mean, so not just the job, but those who are impacted by the job. So, if this job is being done, if this particular job is being done, what next division or department or whomever is impacted by that particular function, that duty, those jobs. Have them part of the process of planning, of being thought partners, because you need that good, rich information so that you can lay a good ground for an apprentice, and also help and set up the mentor with the resources needed to be able to engage that apprentice appropriately. So another thing that I also encourage our clients to do is to develop what I call a worker persona. So what a worker persona is, it's just a picture of the typical worker who has performed this job in industry and in the company. So we want to basically get a sense of, and the why that is so important is because we want to basically be able to prepare an incoming apprentice with a good sense of what they're walking into. The job itself is one thing, but the job exists within its own place and space. So when we talk about the fact that culture is nested and culture is synergistic, because the work environment and the worker is part of a work team, that's part of a department, that's part of a company, and there is an exchange of culture that's happening at all of those levels. And while in some ways that seems like, well, okay, yeah, that's theoretical, that's academic, but it's very practical, and it's very real, because culture is being cultivated. And if we're talking about a culture where historically there have not been a lot of veterans who have worked in that space, or a lot of women who have worked in that space, or a lot of differently abled individuals, be it physically or neurodivergent, who have worked in that space, or people of color who have worked in that space. These are things that we need to think about, right? Because we have to just, not saying that any one of those things is going to make or break anything, but we just want to make sure that as we are preparing an apprentice for their work journey, that will ultimately lead to them being a high functioning, highly productive master in their skill and trade. We need to also know that there is going to be a tempering process, if you will, that is part of any onboarding process, where a new person coming into a space is encountering a space and the culture created, and they're integrating themselves into that culture, and that process in and of itself it changes the atmosphere. So we have to acknowledge that. And so, preparing that worker for that is something in as much as we're possible to do, we should do that. So developing that worker persona typically is one of the tools that we can employ to make sure that, we can help to provide a very realistic picture of the space and the place that an apprentice is entering into. And as it pertains to the mentor-mentee relationship, the mentor can be a super helpful resource, also to help the mentee navigate that space. So when we think about the needs of the mentee, maybe they don't need as much or the intensity of support or mentorship that they may need around, let's say, a particular aspect of one particular aspect of the workplace. It may not be as, let's say, intense as another. What do I mean by that? The challenge that the mentee might face might be the challenge of, wow, I am a returning veteran. I'm a lot older than a lot of the frontline workers in this on this job, and I'm really having a hard time, really cultivating a healthy relationship with them, or I'm just having a hard time just kind of fitting in. So that mentor may need to help them just kind of talk think through, or at least initially serve as a sounding board to say, you know what, this is a real feeling. It's legitimate. Here are some things that they may have encountered that help them in their journey. So getting a sense of those mentee needs and having that worker persona developed, it really helps the mentor know, okay, these are the things that I will definitely be able to help, Kim with. I'll definitely be able to help Kim with, what it feels like to be a returning veteran, what it may feel like to be a woman, what it may feel like to be a woman of color entering into this space. But I'm not going to be so great at helping them with, what it may be, feel like to be a neurodivergent person, or what it may feel like to be a single mom, or whatever those set of factors are. So having that worker persona, knowing the places and spaces that the worker is entering into, the apprentice is entering into, and then getting a sense of, okay, in light of this, where can the mentor fall in and be of most help? Or where can I direct, if I'm the mentor, where can I direct or shepherd that particular apprentice to help them get the other supports and resources that they're going to need to ensure their overall success? So just as we talked about before, when we're talking about the worker persona, we're talking about so many different things: race, age, tenure, psychographics. So who do we know about, or what do we know rather about the incumbent workers? Who do we know them to be historically? Have they been mostly veteran? Have they been mostly men? Have they been mostly single moms or not? Have they been from a generational standpoint of a certain age? If we're talking about some areas or some spaces, it could be the worker persona has typically been, a single white men, or older white men, or some other race, or some other, or some other demographic. It could be that, race is not the factor. It could be that typically, historically, this has been a job that's typically been occupied by, or been a job that's typically been staffed with people of a certain age, people of a certain ability status, whatever the case may be. So we just want to know, and just to provide that resource, that knowledge that enables the apprentice to be appropriately prepared. So, when we think about, also too, considering the mentee assessment, that's going to be an important tool, an important thing that we utilize to better understand mentee needs. We talked about, some of the things that a mentee could encounter. So we want to assess the mentee, and we could be assessing them on so many different things, assessing them aptitudinally, assessing them on some other metrics that we've determined are essential to know something about, so that we can set the mentee up for success. We also want to basically ensure that we are being responsive as we can to their needs. But we never want to use the findings from an assessment as a weeding out mechanism. It helps us to understand, where the mentee is starting in relation to the environment that they're entering. We never also want to use it as a determination of fit. And what I mean by that is to say, okay, you aren't like, the majority of the, logistics workers who are in this space. So therefore, it probably may not be a good idea for you to work in this space. We're not trying to weed folks out. We're not trying to, as Corey mentioned in the quote by Steven Spielberg, we're not trying to create folks in our image, nor are we trying to clone folks to be in the image of the incumbent workers that currently work in those spaces. What we're trying to do is provide apprentices with the skills, the knowledge, the tools, the support that they need to be able to successfully navigate those spaces and successfully contribute as an apprentice. So besides the knowledge, skills, and abilities that you can definitely assess, there are all kinds of, norms, psychometric tools that several different, companies use, several which you probably use. This also really important to have a sense of personality, work style, and leadership style, if those things are important for the job at hand. But definitely, though, if we're talking about the mentor-mentee relationship, these are going to probably be things to some degree we want to know a little bit about, So you may want to consider using them, or you may already be using them from the standpoint of employer and placement, or just getting a sense of that profile of your worker. But when we're talking about compatibility and engaging in a productive and fruitful relationship with a mentor and mentee, we probably do want some insight, and we want to share our findings with the mentor and the mentee. It's really good because what we are doing is we're helping to broker and cultivate a relationship. And so it really will be important to have a handle on those things, be transparent, and share and encourage the mentor and mentee to also talk and have that as something to also build upon. So this is a first phase and not the final word. And that I really can't stress that enough. Assessments don't take the place of mentor-mentee interaction. Assessments are just to develop a sense of awareness and familiarity, and a way to get, as we said, the ball rolling, the conversation going, to get a sense of who is this person that I'm going to be engaging with for some time over the course of my work career in this space. And similarly, for the mentor, who is this person that I'm going to be engaging in and getting to know and spending a lot of time with over the course of my career, or at this phase of my career? A person that's going to that will be a colleague, a person who I'm, may be working on projects with, but a person, if we're talking about a mentor, let's say that's part of the organization, a person who I will probably be going and growing with professionally. And if they're not, let's say, a part of the organization, or when I say the organization, the company, it's still a person with whom this particular individual is going to spend a lot of time, right? So it's really good to have a sense of what is the personality, the work style, the leadership style of all the folks involved. So then, as we go to aligning the mentee needs with mentor experience and expertise, I'm going to turn it over to my colleague and friend Corey DiBiase to walk us through and talk us through these concepts and taking them into action. Corey, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Harris. Fantastic stuff as always. As I think we frequently say, I feel like we talk all about this stuff, we design these sessions, and then I get to actually listen to you talking about these ideas and have just such a just wonderful to hear that perspective, wonderful to hear the depth of that thought on this work. So thank you for that. Working from the foundation that Dr. Harris has established for us here. We want to talk about, of course, when we're thinking about this relationship, we're talking about aligning what the mentee needs with who the mentor is. What is their experience on a formal level? What is their expertise? What has their life been like? How similar or dissimilar is that to the life experience of the mentee? Maybe that's really important. Maybe we're talking about a veteran in transition to a civilian workplace, wanting to have a veteran mentor who's already gone through that and wanting to really delve into what are the complications and the complexities involved in establishing yourself in a civilian workplace, having only previously or primarily previously had military work experience. Maybe it's on an entirely different axis, though, right? So all these questions are going to come to bear when we talk about what Kim has already been sort of exploring, the depth and the diversity of all these different questions that we ask about when we're asking about a relationship, right? And we keep coming back to that word, but I think it's a very important word to kind of ground us in what we're in the stakes and in the range of what we're talking about here, because this word relationship, we use that word to apply to the connection that we have with our spouse. We use that word to apply to the connections we have to a significant other, or to our best friend, or to someone who we talk to once a month in a book club. We use that to describe someone that we work with very closely every day, and we use that to describe someone that well, maybe we don't have a very close working relationship with them. Maybe we kind of don't like working with them at all, but every now and again we have to. All those things are relationships, right? And each one of them is defined by all these both tangible and intangible aspects of the at least two people who are in them. So as we think about these two people in this mentor-mentee relationship, we have to be similarly comprehensive, and we have to allow for a similar range of possibilities here from what could result from what could grow out of this relationship, this mentor-mentee connection. So a lot of that just begins by sort of setting some baseline, grounding in shared expectation, shared goals. Excuse me. So um, as we're first thinking about this relationship, of course, we talked about this in our last session as well, and we've talked in other areas. We want to be providing the support initially to both the mentor and the mentee. It's going to make this relationship successful. So as we're thinking about their connection and their communication, maybe initially we've got some training workshops, some literature, some recorded sessions that we can look at. Maybe we've got some websites that we're giving to both our mentors and mentees to help them understand the possibilities of these relationships, to help them understand all the different iterations that this could possibly take. We're going to be talking with the mentor and the mentee about their expectations. We sort of alluded to this last time. I kind of think of this, one of the possible ranges of possible relationship factors that we might think of is just really around how formal or informal, how much personal connection is someone looking for. Some mentees may come into this relationship thinking, what I want is someone who's going to tell me how to get ahead in this business, how to advance in my career in this field. That's all I'm looking for. I'm not looking to talk about my military experience. I'm not looking to talk about my upbringing in this community, or I don't care about any of that stuff. All I want is to talk about how I can advance within this career. Someone else might say, well, no, I've got, like we use the example of a veteran, of a military member transitioning into a civilian career. It's going to be a lot more about intangibles there, right? It's like, what does it mean to, like, what should I be doing to sort of adapt to this new civilian space that I'm in? And by the way, I keep using the personal pronouns there. I am not a veteran myself, as I always like to make that clear. But speaking from that perspective, of course, someone in that transition process probably wants to know a lot more about the intangibles of what it means to be successful in this business, rather than just saying, okay, let's tell me exactly what competencies I need and how am I going to stack my credentials and move forward as efficiently as possible into a managerial supervisory position. And it's going to be, of course, any number of different variations on that possible scale and on others as well. So the last thing we're going to be talking about in this initial matching piece here is really what would we describe as our pain points. Another way of putting this might simply be to say, what are the needs of the mentee that we are hoping to meet here, that what are they hoping to get out of this relationship? And equally, just as we'd said, what is the mentor hoping to get out of this relationship? What are some areas where they're concerned? Like, do they feel very strongly that, yeah, I can talk all about, you want to know about hard skills and certifications and how to get ahead in this business? I can do that all day long. But geez, I don't know if I feel terribly comfortable talking about more personal aspects of the employee-employer relationship. Fine. We want to know all that initially. We want to have all those conversations initially, and we want to have a system in place by which, as this relationship grows and changes and evolves, as it simply has to, and that has every time we interact with someone else, with another person, our relationship with them changes slightly, right? Often that's good, often that's progress, but we want to know in advance that as the relationship changes, that we've got sort of systems in place to say, okay, to check in and make sure everything's still working for everyone, everyone's still getting what they need, everyone is still comfortable with where this relationship is, right? And of course, so much of that is going to come back to this question of goals. What is it that the mentee is hoping to get from this relationship, as well as asking a similar question: what is the mentor hoping to get? But of course, we begin with the mentee's concerns, the mentee's interests in this relationship. So that's really where we begin this process of the matching is understanding both who the mentee is and what their goals are. That's going to tell us a lot about the flip side of this coin of what is the correct, what is the most appropriate, most effective match that we can make between mentor and mentee in this situation. And we would divide this notion of these goals that we're talking about into, very broadly into what we would call doing goals and goals about being goals. Do goals and be goals. And we'll talk a little bit more about what that means. Now, the do goals, that's a little bit more straightforward. This is about, this is probably how we would describe the person who comes in and says, you know what? I'm not here to make a best friend. I'm here to learn about what I need to do to get ahead in this business and get, advance as quickly as possible and to be as effective as possible. That's a lot. Those are a lot of doing goals, right? And those are typically going to be a little bit easier to define. So they're going to be shorter term, because this is not necessarily going to include where I want to be 20 years from now. This is going to be where I want to be 6 months, a year from now. What is my immediate career trajectory, and how is this mentor relationship going to help me with that? A lot of that's going to be about, okay, did I acquire the following 5 skills? Did I acquire this certification? Are these pieces coming together the way we predicted? A little bit more clear, right? A little bit more straightforward. It's going to be pretty easy to tell. If I say that my goal is to get a certification in the following skill set as an electrician, well, it's going to be pretty clear. Do I have that or not? Do I have that certification, or did I not achieve that? And if so, or if not, why? What do we do next? So again, a little bit easier to measure, a little bit more observable than what we would call our being goals that we'll talk about right now. So this is, again, we would describe these as potentially invisible, less potentially intangible goals. It's going to require some more steps to measure. This is about, again, I use my example of someone transitioning from military to civilian employment. That transition from the military culture to civilian culture. Of course, we know that transition that's changing someone's entire life, right? They're not just getting a new job when you transition from military service to civilian employment. That's not just like, oh, I used to have this job and now I have this job. It's an entire shift. It's a shift of someone's entire life experience. So a veteran in that situation might say, hey, one of my goals is I don't feel all that well connected to my new civilian colleagues. I try and make small talk. It just isn't the way it doesn't work the way it used to work when I was talking to folks in the military. We make jokes and they're not quite the same jokes, or we have these kind of informal events, and it just doesn't feel the way my connections to other folks in the military felt. So maybe a goal for me in this case would be that for a veteran in that case would be to say, okay, after 3 months, this veteran is going to start participating in some other social aspects of the workplace. Maybe every Wednesday afternoon, people spend an hour and do some kind of book club, or they do some kind of activity together, once a fiscal quarter, whatever it is. We would want to see that the veteran in this case would be participating in more of those events, and of course also reporting that yes, they are beginning to feel more comfortable. They are beginning to feel more connected to their civilian coworkers, and that's and we see those things happening. So again, we might sort of need some secondary indicators, right, to understand what that means. Like the idea that someone participates in a social activity, that doesn't necessarily mean they feel very strongly connected to someone. I'm sure we've all participated in some social activities that didn't necessarily mean we felt well connected to the people we were participating with, right? Um, but it is a way for us to measure secondarily if someone's sense of comfort is increasing. And so again, much more subtle, much more nuanced, much more intangible, but still we want to both define these goals and we want to define what having some success in them looks like. And I would further say, just to add a little bit more context to this, if we think about the mentor-mentee relationship that might get a veteran to the point of meeting their goals, it could be two very different possible relationships. It could be many different possible relationships, but just thinking very broadly, we might want that veteran rather might say, you know what, I want to talk to someone else who's done this. I want to talk to someone who comes from a military background, but made this transition. They built these connections. I want someone who's had these experiences, the same experiences and challenges that I'm having now. Another mentor might say, you know what, I don't need to talk to someone else who also has my same background in military experience. I already know that. I've already got other folks from my military network that I can call on if I need assistance. I'm all set as far as that goes. What I want to know, I want to make a connection with someone from this industry, from the civilian side of things, because that's what I feel I don't understand. Well, that's the relationship I want to build. Neither of those, that's not a right answer and a wrong answer. Those are both right answers based on what the mentor is looking, or the mentee is looking for. Those are both right answers that might evolve over time. Maybe at first that connection with another veteran is going to be helpful, and then after a period of time they feel like, okay, this is great, but now I want to ask some questions of folks. I want to have this kind of tight knit relationship with someone who has a very different perspective to help me branch out and understand more about these possible connections. So again, just a wide variety of different possibilities here will require more steps to understand whether these goals are being addressed the way they should be. Will be a little bit less straightforward than saying, okay, did Corey get this certification or not? Very straightforward. Does Corey feel comfortable and well adapted to this new work environment? Okay, well, that's harder to determine, but we can determine it. We can ask questions and understand how effective we're being in supporting someone in that sense. So, and this, as Kim said before in her sort of overview of this, we want to define the goals of this relationship, but we don't want to limit the goals of this relationship. We might say initially that okay, the reason we are connecting Shanique with this mentor who like Shanique has experience in the military, who also has the experience of being a female veteran, a female military member. So we're going to make all those connections because we know the goal is for Shanique to feel more comfortable and more connected to this company. So that's great. We've defined those goals, but we're not doing anything to say and we will never move past this point, or we'll never talk about this. We might find that there are other areas of connection that naturally, like any relationship, naturally, organically progresses and starts moving in different directions. We want to give this process the power to do that. We want this new relationship to move in whatever direction it wants to move, because again, organic, it's got to move in its own direction. So we want to support the mentor mentee in, as Kim said, in claiming their agency and defining this relationship in their own terms. They need to be the ones, the mentor and the mentee together, defining this relationship. However, on the flip side of that, right, we still need some objective overlay, right? We still need to have a clear sense of like an outside sense of what the goals are here. How do we define success in a way that we know this process is working to meet some broader goals that we've defined? So Maybe that's where we're using our evaluation process or our evaluation tools, individual assessment tools, our individual planning process. If we're using an IEP style, individual employment or education plan process, that gives us the chance to kind of have our cake and eat it too. We're giving the mentor and the mentee the power to define this relationship for themselves, also setting aside these objective standards that are going to say, okay, this relate, however we get to this goal, we don't care. We're totally neutral on that. How this goal is achieved, how this relationship supports this goal. But still, I do want to see that, yes, we're making some progress on these goals. Like, did we match Kim with this mentor Corey, so to help her with her master some of the tasks of this new job that she's taken on, only to find that after 6 months, wow, they have a great relationship. They talk every week. They're having a great time. But Kim seems not to have acquired any of these new skills that we talked about. Okay, that means there's something good is happening, but we also know that, okay, there's a fundamental goal here we were trying to meet, and whatever it is that Corey and Kim are talking about in these mentorship sessions, clearly Corey is not providing the support that Kim requires to acquire some of these specific skills that we talked about here. So again, we have our cake and eat it too by both imbuing the process with the freedom to define itself, but also having these external standards that we can turn to and say, okay, are we objectively moving towards our goal? Is this process helping? If not, then why? What adjustments need to be made? What is that going to look like? All that kind of good stuff that we would be talking about right here. So the next piece of this puzzle is going to be about clarifying expectations, and we've talked about this again and again. Part of the reason we keep coming back to this so frequently is because this is potentially such a nuanced, such a hard to define process. Again, it's a relationship. We want this to be a close, organic relationship. We want it to grow in whatever direction it's going to grow in. But that means that from the outset and on a continuing basis, we need to be able to come back to this and redefine and ensure that everyone's expectations are being met and that they're evolving in essentially in the right way. So we would right at the outset, right? We're gonna be conveying to both the mentor and the mentee. Why do we do this? Why do we take the time to make these mentor relationships? Well, right from the start, we're gonna say this is what these are the outcomes we expect. These are the goals that we've agreed that we're hoping to meet. This is what this process is going to look like. Those expectations should be communicated both in conversation, but then in writing. Like if there's a minimum expectation for how much time is spent or a maximum expectation for how much time is taken in this process, we want to define that. Is it going to necessarily occur at the workplace, or can it happen outside of it? All those elements we want to define, and we want to give the mentor and the mentee the freedom to define a lot of those elements for themselves, again, within a framework and structure. But we want to be very clear. We want things both in conversation and in writing, not as kind of a like, oh, we better cross our I's and dot our T's, just as a matter of common understanding. If we're talking through all these details, if we have things in writing that we can give to folks, that just makes sure that we are level setting our expectations at the same point. All of this, the different factors we might be considering are: what role is the mentor and the mentee? What roles are they going to play for one another? Again, we might ask, one mentor might be much more about the formal skills. They're just conveying what the formal skills and expectations are. Another mentee mentor relationship might be much more about my sense of engagement and identity and connection with the workplace and with my colleagues. Two different sets of goals, two different sets of expectations. The point is simply that we clarify them and that everyone's on the same page. How long do we expect this to go on for? Is this 6 months? Is this a year? Is it shorter? Is it longer? How intensive will it be in that time? Is this going to be a situation where it's like, nope, once a month, Kim and Corey meet for an hour and they talk, and we know that their goals are going to be talking through these specific skills that we want to be built up here, and that's it. That's the whole scope of this relationship. Different relationship might be much more intangible, might allow much more room for saying, oh, you know what? Corey might text Kim with it inside of business hours and just say, I'm really struggling with something. Can we talk for 15 minutes? Sort of on an ad hoc basis. All of that is fine. It just needs to be defined clearly, and that everyone is on the same page. Everyone has the same expectations. And then again, what are our means of contact? Is this in person at a coffee shop? Is this Zoom meetings? Do we do cell phones? How much access does someone have to someone else? And does the mentee have to the mentor? And how are they going to use that access in a way that makes the most sense for everyone? So again, this is just about going through each of these details, and part of, again, allowing for as much creativity and flexibility as possible will mean that as we do that, we're still defining those expectations very clearly, understanding things can change, understanding the relationship can evolve, understanding this could be something very different looking 3 months or 6 months from now. Simply that, and again, that's all fine, that's all great, that's the process working the way it should. But what it must mean in all that is that expectations are both initially very clearly defined, and then as they shift, they are redefined, so that at no point in time do we get in a situation where, like, wow, we talked about Corey, what this mentor-mentee relationship was all about, and he just gave us a totally different picture than what Dr. Harris said when we talked to her, that they're clearly not on the same page. Well, if that's happening, we've got a problem, right? And so that's why we keep coming back to this level setting around expectations. And with that, that brings us back to wanting to think about the evaluation element of this, which brings us back to wanting to hear from our good friend, Dr. Harris, to please take us home here and wrap up this session for us.
Thank you so much, Corey. As always, really, really appreciate it. And in all of the things that Corey lifted up, talking about, the fact that we have to make sure that there is, a meeting of the minds, right, around the expectations that we're singing from the same hymn sheet, so that we're moving toward the same direction. That the matching process is one that yields the outcomes that we definitely are in quest of. This is once again a place and space where the evaluator and the evaluation process lends itself to making that difference and ensuring that there is alignment, there's fidelity, there is a systematic way of measuring and and making sure that we're capture what's learned, right? Because there are learnings happening that we recognize, we capture, we leverage those, and we utilize those for process improvement, for sure, course correction where needed. And some of these slides are going to look a little bit familiar, but we're just going to talk about them from the context of the discussion that we've been having in webinar 4, talking about the matching process. This slide and the slide that follows should look familiar to you from webinar 2, from webinar 3 as well. But the whole notion and the whole purpose of a program evaluation being aligned with the program design. And when we unpack a program, especially something like as comprehensive and in some ways complex as a registered apprenticeship program, there are several components, and all of those components, we got to get them right, right? We're aiming toward a goal of highly trained, highly skilled, master trades and skilled persons contributing to the companies where they work, making them productive, and them earning this livelihood, this, a thriving livelihood. So there are several components in that process, all of which we've got to get right. So when we're thinking about that matching process, going back to then that design, thinking about, how do you want to match? What things are going to be prioritized in the match? Is it more about personality? Is it more about KSAs? Is it more about something else, right? Do we need multiple matches? An evaluation plan and design can be as granular as needs be. Oftentimes, it's going to exist somewhere in terms of in the middle, not too high level, such that we really can apply it from situation to situation, but not so granular that we really get lost in the minutia in a way that we really weren't planning for. But when we think about that whole notion of program of evaluation reflecting the design, program of evaluation reflecting the design of the program, the evaluator's role in this matching process is to truly be that thought partner with the stakeholders in this process to think through what are we prioritizing? What types of supports, what have we, just thinking through all of the things that are going to be essential to a good relationship and from the perspective of a mentor and mentee. So, excuse me, that program evaluator is going to definitely need to know and look at the personas of the incumbent workers, sit down with the stakeholders to talk about, as we conceptualize the toolkits that are needed, what have you planned for? Now, what kinds of questions do we want to ask? What do we want these toolkits to help the mentors achieve? What types of things do we want the toolkit to help the mentees to achieve? Thinking through all of those things, all of those core questions, such that as we craft the indicators for all of these parts, right, and the matching process being one of those parts, we can make sure that we're asking the right questions, that we can make sure that we are assessing the right things, and we can always keep our eye toward alignment and fidelity. So there's definitely that part as well. Also, too, thinking about and understanding and thinking through and thinking about understanding the effectiveness of the matching process. The evaluation is an important resource in making sure that the Registered Apprenticeship Mentorship Program is meeting the goals and helping the organization meet its strategic goals and plans. So the evaluation itself is, as we've been talking about, asking the right questions. Why do we continue to repeat this and lift this up? Because the questions that we ask are going to basically be the driver of many of the things that we do. We know that the assessments that you develop and that we develop need to basically be in service to those questions. So as your thought partner in this process, we want to think through what are the questions that we need to be asking? What are the things that we care about? What are the indicators that really make the question actionable so that we can say, oh, so when we're beginning to measure, when we're beginning to assess, we're going to be looking for evidence in these ways. So we want to be asking the right questions. We want to make sure then, therefore, we collect the right data, the right metrics. And once again, alignment, alignment, alignment. Because ultimately we want a successful mentorship program. One of the ways that success is going to be measured is if we have a successful apprenticeship program. And there are going to be several other metrics and indicators that we will, develop alongside all of the relevant stakeholders who are part of the process. And then as we think about, once again, we come back to this a lot. Engage the evaluator when? As early as possible. Why? So that we can develop and refine a monitoring plan. That's one part. That is not even an attachment, it's a complement to all of the other things that the evaluator will help to do. We want to not only be able to measure and assess success, we want to monitor process to ensure that processes are basically informing success in the future. And once again, to always harp on the role that the evaluator plays as a data translational expert. So what can we learn from previous cohorts around matching? What types of data, forward-facing data, what types of data subsequent to, let's say, or looking at data across time to get a sense of, based upon how mentors and mentees were matched in the past, what do we see in the careers of these folks going down the line that points to the impact of that matching in how they are able to do their jobs now. So we definitely want to always, data translation is going to be a part of this process in every step and every component along the way. And also to thinking about understanding the effectiveness of the matching process as we think about collaboration, collaborating with the evaluator to clearly identify the goals of the matching process. This goes back to the conversation that Corey just had and that I was talking about a bit before. What things do we want to prioritize in matching? Some of that is going to be just blanket across the board. They are not non-negotiators. These are things that we want to make sure that each mentor-mentee relationship yields. We want effective communication. We want impactful engagement. We want certain things that we want to be present in each one of these relationships. But then depending upon the needs, going back to that initial assessment and thinking about those mentee needs, there may be other things. There may be other mentor-mentee relationships that need to exist. So we need to also be thinking about what other things should we be asking about or be prepared to ask. We should be looking for or be prepared to look for based upon those needs, right? So we also want to work with the evaluator to develop indicators that will signal success. When will we know we've achieved our goal? When will we know we're halfway there? What are the things that matter so much that they rise to the level of mile markers that we want to say, when this thing is done, we have a good level of confidence that we can achieve the goal in X amount of time. Or if we see this and this and this being done or present in the mentor-mentee relationship, we pretty much have, excuse me, a relationship that's going to be a successful one and get that apprentice over the finish line in this phase of their journey. As Corey so eloquently lifted up in that example, you could probably have, and it has happened where there can be a really successful match on so many levels of compatibility around personality and other attributes that may lend themselves to a lot of affinity between a mentor and a mentee. But if that doesn't translate into the other things that need to be present, accountability, critique, feedback, how are you conveying what needs to be done? Or are you the type of mentor that is able to help shepherd and guide a mentee to other folks in the organization or within that ecosystem of that particular job, trade unions, worker organizations, or whomever that can say, hey, this is a person that could also help you. This is a person within my network who could give you valuable feedback or can help you answer some questions that, hey, I'm just not equipped to answer, or I don't know about in depth to the degree as another person within, let's say, that mentor's network. So sometimes it can be really lovely in so many ways, but not quite a good match in some other ways that really matter to have a successful apprentice, go over the finish line and be able to do their job successfully. So that's also something that we have to be mindful of and think about. You also want to work with the evaluator to establish how frequently do we want to measure certain things. Some things it may make sense to be an annual measurement. Some things quarterly, some things on some other timetable, depending upon, as Corey may have definitely mentioned in the previous webinar. It could also be an artifact to the work cycle. When are things super busy? Or when are things, kind of more at a lull? There are all kinds of things that we need to be thinking about in as much as we can in their totality, so that not only are we asking the right questions, but we're asking them at the right time, and we're asking them frequently enough, yet not crossing that line and being burdensome and impeding the workers from being able to do their jobs effectively, right? Because at the end of the day, it is also about that as well. And also, too, there needs to be a plan, and the evaluator is essential for that. Have a plan and helping to craft a plan for how the data is going to be used. Now, do we want to see some things that may need to be tweaked in worker assessment and evaluation? Do we want to use this data to tell our story of success to clients or to others in our ecosystem, to potential new recruits of or new hires of apprentices? How do we want to leverage the data? To whom do we want to tell our story? How will we tell the story? But an evaluator can be super important for helping to craft a plan for how that data will be used as well. And now, once again, we've come to the end of a session, and we are so excited and happy that you have, joined us again for this particular session. We are almost at the finish line in terms of what webinar sessions in this particular series, and we definitely are enjoying the time and having this conversation. Here's a little bit about what you can expect in the next sessions 5 and 6. We're going to be talking about conducting effective mentorship sessions and supporting the growth in the mentor-mentee relationship. So we do hope that you'll stay tuned and join us for those conversations. They hopefully will be just as fruitful as you found these, maybe even more so. And always, we definitely encourage you to please keep in contact, follow us, stay tuned in all of the other ways that we communicate with you and others within our community and ecosystem. You can definitely check out the website, follow us on social media. Please avail yourself of our newsletter for all things that are going on and things concerning the Supply Chain Automation Workforce Hub. We are always happy to be in conversation with you, and we look forward to you joining us in our next sessions. And with that, we say thank you. Take care.